the Northrop F-5E Tiger II, a low-cost, supersonic light fighter that began its life in the late 1950s. It was a quick, nimble, and had one thing in mind: air superiority. Hi there, my name's Icarol, and today I will be telling you all why I think the F-5E Tiger II may just be the greatest aircraft ever made. Before I start though, I'd like to welcome you all to the video, and I hope that I can make it entertaining enough for you all. If you're eating dinner while watching this, drop a comment down below and tell me what you're eating. Alright, let's do this. Back in the height of the Cold War, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization issued NATO Basic Military Requirement 1, or NBMR-1. I'll be referring to it as this in the future. What NBMR-1 sought was a lightweight tactical fighter that could carry both nuclear and conventional weapons and can operate from rough and rugged terrain. So basically, NATO wanted a premier jet that could cover all their bases in case conflicts rose and the Cold War went hot. It should be said that in the late 1950s, the atmosphere of the world military stage began to shift. Long past were the days of P-51 Mustangs being replaced with a newer, superior version once or twice a year. Jets were expensive. A gentleman by the name of Edgar Schmud acted as vice president and aircraft designer for Northrop at the time of NBMR-1. Edgar can also be traced back to his other efforts, a little number known as the P-51 Mustang, as well as the F-86 Sabre. With a resume like this, it's clear that Mr. Schmud was always on the bleeding edge of aircraft design, and what he had in store for Northrop wasn't going to be any different. NATO wanted an airframe that could keep with the times, something which didn't have the same archaic life cycles as piston aircraft in the Second World War. Schmud agreed with this and demanded that his project had engineered growth potential, which is a fancy mechanic talk for something that can last more than a decade without becoming a floating target. In 1955, a wonderful invention came in the form of the General Electric J-85 engine. Apparently it was made for the ADM-20 Quail, a decoy for the B-52 bomber. Real quick, did any of you guys know this thing existed? I didn't know until I started researching this video. Anyway, when posed against the engines that the legendary McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom had, the J-79, the new J-85s produced a whopping 7.5 thrust-to-weight ratio compared to the J-79's measly 4.7. So that's a lot. Pound for pound, that is a lot of extra thrust. And while yes, I am cherry picking the highest numbers for both engines, and actual statistics varied by the version themselves, I'm saving both myself and you guys that time. After all, who really has the patience for long form videos anyway? With these engines as the heart of the project, the engineering team at Northrop got to work. An official project name of N-156TX arrived in March of 1955. Initially, they wanted the engines to lie underneath the wings, almost like the Gloucester Meteor or the Messerschmitt 262, or even the Yak-25. Though, by the end of the 1950s, those approaches were already seen as far too archaic, and a new approach was taken soon thereafter. See, while Mr. Schmud was a designing genius, two brains were always better than one. Another bespoke actor in this story is one Welko Geisch. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, German's not really my forte. Anyway, Geisch acted as Schmud's chief QA tester, and insisted that the engines within the N-156 need to be placed within the fuselage to have maximum performance. It wouldn't even be difficult to point out the validity in his statement, and he didn't even have to go very far. He could just point out Schmud's previous works with the Sabre to emphasize his point. Now, and while I respect Mr. Schmud for his avant-garde approach to aircraft design, now just isn't the time, especially with the market as hot as it was in the 50s. Because of Geisch, the N-56 wasn't thrown in the garbage entirely. After a brief stint in trying to get a carrier escort fighter for the US Navy, a new design arose. By December of the next year, 1956, PD-2879D came forward. And I can't find any real images of PD-2879D, but its design had apparently been near identical to the first prototype of the F-5A. So what you see in front of you is a picture of the YF-5A, and all it's lacking compared to PD-2879 is the lack of tailhook for an arrestor cable. At the same time as Project PD-2879, at the time of the N-165 project, the United States Air Force was still using a very old and very reputable aircraft known as the T-33, also known as the Shooting Star. While the Shooting Star was an incredible platform for training pilots, its age was beginning to show. There was a new generation of aircraft dawning, and the T-33 wasn't bound to be suitable for much longer. Enter the T-38. While it performed its first official test in June of 1959, which is a whopping 4 years after N-156TX's project began, it absolutely blew everyone away. Because of this, the production of the N-156 was placed on the back burner, and the trainer, which had become known as the Talon, began production. Now, let's rewind a little bit. You guys remember NBMR-1, right? I was just talking about it. I would hope you remember. NBMR-1 had already saw its lead candidate in the form of the Fiat G91, and not everyone was able to afford such a pretty piece of Italian steel. Because of this, the United States sought to produce a low-cost fighter for export, supplying their allies under the Military Assistance Program. Since America was looking for an export which could make them look good, a series of potential platforms came from the woodworks, with N-156 showing its face once again. On its first flight in June 30th, 1959, this little hot rod managed to break the speed of sound. Talk about a loud impression. What was more, the platform shows incredible maneuverability, excellent reliability, and excelled in the ground attack role, doing even better than the Air Force's current fleet of F-100s. It seemed like the stage was set for it to dominate, and it was. But for some reason, America didn't bite. At least, not right away. Additional tests came along in 1961, where the United States Army had to come out along with the Douglas A-4 Skyhawk and the aforementioned G91, putting out a little competition between the three to see who could perform better at reconnaissance as well as close air support. Well, I guess something got ignored on the way up the food chain, because the Air Force, which is the ones responsible for fixed-wing aircraft deployment in the Army, pulled the plug on this, and just like that, it seemed like the N-156 was already with 2 strikes on its name. But our story doesn't end there. In 1962, under the Kennedy administration, America was still looking for a lightweight fighter to fill their ranks and export to their allies. With it being over 2 decades since America first entered World War II, a new competition was on the rise. In April of the next year, the FX competition entered the public eye, and this was a pretty open and shut competition for the N-156, which had just earned its proper title as F-5E. So, what is the F-5E? Simple. It's a twin-engine, multi-role fighter that had a wide assortment of weapons it could use to bring ballistic freedom to NATO's enemies. This only got better in 1972 when the F-5E Tiger II variant was made. You see, it was called the Tiger II because Grumman, who is another incredibly notable aircraft manufacturer, named their F-11F the Tiger back in 1954. But I have a feeling that everyone in the naming board realized it was just too damn cool to pass up. This thing received nothing but positive feedback from mechanics, pilots, buyers, and sellers. It could loiter for quite some time thanks to its ability to take external tanks of fuel. It could lay the beat down on a tank with a paveway, and in later variants, really reach out and touch someone with the addition of the AIM-120 AMRAAM missile. In fact, in its lifespan and service from 1975 to 1990, it was so well loved and well rounded, it acted as a host for numerous testing platforms. The first of these we'll cover also happens to be my personal favorite, the F-20 Tigershark. It's such a menacing name, right? I remember playing through Ace Combat 5 as a little boy at my dad's house and unlocking the Tigershark about halfway through the game. It really served me well when I had to shoot down a ton of fighters in this one mission that had a bunch of jamming aircraft in it. It's good times. Well, outside of the virtual world, the F-20 also was posed to become the greatest hallmark of American export fighters, and I do not say this lightly. Brigadier General Charles Elwood Yeager. Yeah, that Chuck Yeager even went on record saying that it was a magnificent machine. Now, excuse me, but when you have a fucking legend like Chuck Yeager saying your machine is magnificent, it'd only take the devil's own hand to keep it from reaching such a high platform. However, that seems to be what it had. During the testing of the Tigershark in South Korea, a test pilot known as Daryl Cornell died of G-LOC, or G-force-induced loss of consciousness. Then again, in the next year, it happened again. A second test pilot had lost their life, tragically, in a test accident from the aircraft. And I don't say this to besmirch the name of those brave pilots who lost their lives, but the plane was essentially too good at its job. To speak plainly, it could handle G-forces faster and better than its pilots. And a shark that bites its handler isn't one that America wanted, swimming in its own skies. Because of the negative backlash, the F-20 was canned in favor of the F-16 Fighting Falcon. I could do a whole other video on the Tigershark because, in my opinion, it's one of the most unique cases of aircraft variations in modern history. Who knows? Maybe someday I will. Getting a bit back on subject, before it left service, the F-5E made quite a role for itself, acting as an excellent export fighter, and also performed amazingly as an aggressor. For those of you who don't know what an aggressor is, they're basically aircraft piloted by individuals who mimic the flight patterns and follow doctrines of foreign countries. One of America's most common actors would be Russian adversaries. If any of you watched the original Top Gun, the MiGs that they used in that fight, yeah, those were actually F-5s. Funnily enough though, the Tiger loved playing as the bad guy. Formally, the F-5 would be adopted as the Op-4 Aggressor, or Opposing Forces Aggressor, because of its similar dimensions to a workhorse Soviet jet, the MiG-21 Fishbed. In 1977 at Nellis Air Force Base, the Tiger squared off against America's two biggest names in the aviation world, the F-14 Tomcat and the F-15 Eagle. Official reports have been cited saying, quote, "For the first 3 weeks of the test, the F-14s and F-15s were hopelessly outclassed and demoralized." Now think about that for a minute. America's most advanced air superiority fighters were demoralized by the Tiger in a fight? In the same report, it says that the Tomcats also managed a 2-to-1 kill ratio against the far older F-5, though this was after adjustments to the rules of engagement were made, skewing the favor of the aircraft, which could use longer range missiles. Because of these immediate changes, the Tomcats did reign victorious because of their use of the proprietary AIM-54 Phoenix missile. Actions of this sort weren't few or far between, and until the day of their retirement, the F-5E received great amounts of love and support as well as a few upgrades before beginning to get brought off the runways of American air bases in 1990. Now, I know what you're thinking. Aiko, why is this not still being used? Well, turns out it is. Just because the USA doesn't use the F-5E doesn't mean it's not being used worldwide. Pilots in Brazil, Greece, Iran, Mexico, the Netherlands, Norway, Taiwan, Venezuela, the list goes on, all still use and covet their Tigers, with many of them adding indigenous upgrades to keep them relevant in our modern day and age. Perhaps most importantly, the T-38 Talon, the trainer I mentioned before, it's still in service. Young, new aviators from around the world find themselves in the seat of a Talon first, more times than not. I have the pleasure of living right next to Beale Air Force Base, and I can see pilots flying around our area all the time. Hearing their engines go full burn as they rocket through the skies is always so fascinating to watch and to hear. I can only imagine what it must feel like to be in it. I often wonder if those pilots are experiencing for the first time themselves, or if they're seasoned veterans who just like hot rodding through the skies. It's true that the Boeing Saab T-7 Red Hawk will likely be making its debut soon. All planes will meet their final flight one day or another. However, this cat lived a lifespan longer than all of its feline cousins, and will likely stay in use for the imminent future. There's always a demand for a small, nimble aircraft that can get in the air faster than it could be refueled. And that's why I think the F-5E Tiger II may just be the greatest aircraft ever made. Thank you all for watching. If you liked it, I'd appreciate if you all showed it by clicking that like button. If you hated it, go ahead and push the dislike button. It won't be anything personal. I appreciate you all for listening to me go on about a plane for so long. After all, this is my first attempt at ever doing something like this. And if you all like the music that was in this video, I'll have a list of all the tracks I use in the description in chronological order. And that's all for me, guys. I hope you all have a nice day. I'll see you around.